Atonement, written by Ian McEwan, is one of those novels that captures you from the off. Ian McEwan does admittedly take his time a bit at the beginning, painstakingly recounting a hot summer's day where a young child, Bryony, is forcing her cousins to perform a play. This one day takes up about a third of the book. As the characters all fuss over one another, there is a tension and suspense built up from the off. You just know something bad is about to happen, and that's why you must keep reading. Atonement is a magnificent novel, shaped and paced with awesome confidence and eloquence, independent. Subtle as well as powerful, adeptly encompassing comedy as well as atrocity, Atonement is a richly intricate book. Atonement follows a 13-year-old aspiring writer, Bryony Tallis, from the failure of her first childish attempt at drama, The Trials of Arabella, to its presentation, 6 decades later, by the grandchildren of the ginger-haired, freckled cousins who had wanted to be its stars. Bryony is the youngest of the Tallises' 3 children, raised virtually as an only child because a decade separates her from Cecilia and their 12-year-older brother Leon. Leon, an easy-go-lucky banker in London, brings a rich and vapid friend, Paul Marshall, home for a summer holiday, occasioning Bryony's play and a formal dinner party in his honor. The cousins, 15-year-old Lola Quincy and identical twins Pierrot and Jackson, age 9, arrive at the Tallis estate as refugees from parental divorce. Frustrating rehearsals and rivalry with Lola contribute to the collapse of the play, but its demise is more motivated by Bryony's decision to write a story about a confrontation she accidentally sees between Cecilia and 23-year-old Robbie Turner, the family landscaper and childhood friend of Bryony's siblings, whose education has been financed by their father. Cecilia is ready to move on with her life, but she feels obliged to give the family one last summer of attention. Robbie is looking forward to beginning medical school. Cecilia and Robbie, albeit vaguely, that they must clarify their relationship before leaving. Preparing for the festive dinner, Robbie types a note to Cecilia that includes inappropriate sexual musings. He handwrites an expurgated version, but in a Freudian slip he hands the wrong version to Bryony for delivery to her sister. Bryony reads it and is shocked, convinced that Robbie is a threat to her sister. In the library, Bryony misinterprets Robbie and Cecilia making love as a physical assault. When the disgruntled twins run away, search parties are organized and Bryony, searching alone, comes upon Lola being assaulted in the darkness by someone she is convinced is the monstrous Robbie. Bryony's imagination sends him to prison. Robbie is released 3.5 years later on the condition that he join the British Expeditionary Force in France. Wounded by shrapnel, Robbie and 2 corporals make their hazardous way to Dunkirk for evacuation. Cecilia's love, expressed in letters that begin while Robbie is in prison, are all that sustains him as infection spreads and his strength flags. Cecilia has become a nurse and has cut herself off from her family. Bryony follows her sister's career path and experiences the rigors of training in the Nightingale tradition. Bryony is determined to make amends by recanting her testimony. After treating the first wave of wounded evacuees from Dunkirk, Bryony drops in on Lola and Paul Marshall's wedding, then on Cecilia, whom Robbie is visiting. After a tense face-off, Bryony agrees to reveal everything to the world. This endeavor consumes most of the next 6 decades of Bryony's life, and after a 77th birthday celebration and diagnosis with vascular dementia, Bryony realizes the story will have to be published posthumously. She contemplates how her readers will want a happy ending, and she does not show Robbie dying on the beach of septicemia and Cecilia being killed in the bombing of London. Having done her best to atone, Bryony is tired and needs to sleep. With a title like Atonement, it seems obvious the novel is about coming to terms with guilt. Bryony Tallis does not mention her feelings of guilt outright very often. She spends much of the novel subtly shifting partial blame for Robbie Turner's fate onto others. Paul should not have raped Lola, and he should not have used Robbie as a convenient scapegoat for his crime. Her mother, Emily Tallis, should have known Paul Marshall raped Lola Quincy if she knows everything. Her father, Jack Tallis, should have been more involved with his family and stepped in to defend his protégé, Robbie. Her cousin Lola Quincy should have spoken up instead of letting the clueless Bryony speak for her. Robbie himself should not have used the obscene word he uses in his letter to Cecilia. And Robbie and Cecilia Tallis should have found a more private place to make love than the library, where Bryony walked in on them. During her time as a nurse, Bryony acknowledges the burden of her guilt and how it pursues her, guilt refined, detail into an eternal loop, a rosary to be fingered for a lifetime. She wishes she could have been brave enough to apologize personally to Cecilia, so she fabricates a visit to her sister where she has a chance to do so. It is not until the end of her life that Bryony is ready to go public with her private shame, but she cannot publish Atonement until her fellow sinners Paul and Lola are dead. She knows she can never attain forgiveness, but she unburdens herself of guilt by her lifelong attempt to set things right, even if this can be done only in fictional form. It is also important that almost everyone, with the exception of Cecilia and Robbie's mother, immediately believe that Robbie is guilty. Robbie is from a lower class which is more traditionally associated with criminality. Jack and Emily's class prejudices are noted in the novel. Paul Marshall, on the other hand, is the real perpetrator of the assault upon Lola. His wealth and status mean he is not even a suspect. He is able to eventually marry his victim, meaning he will forever avoid the consequences for his crime. At this point, McEwan also introduces the theme of an individual's perspective on events and how it shapes her reality. The majority of events in the story are presented through a point of view, peculiar to a certain character. For instance, from Cecilia's perspective, Robbie is an innocent and loving man, while Bryony's biases, assumptions, and misunderstandings associated with the scenes at the fountain and letters contribute to the formation of his corrupted image. The given juxtaposition results in the emergence of critical conflict that ends with tragedy and multiple suffering. In such a way, McEwan emphasizes the fact that every person is capable of creating her reality even if it rests on wrong assumptions or incomplete representations. The individual's perspective also impacts the acts of creativity, which can be related to the theme of religion and God. Using her representations, Bryony continues to tell readers a story of a happy reunion and Robbie's justification. It is her perspective that comes from the feeling of guilt and the desire for atonement. Being a godlike figure for her world, she remains impacted by her irrelevant ideas and representations, which results in the introduction of a new reality with happy heroes. However, it remains isolated and cannot be considered a true act of redemption. When the novel begins, Bryony is 13 years old, already on the cusp between childhood and young adulthood. The arrival of her cousin Lola seems to make Bryony self-conscious of her childish tendencies, and she suddenly has the desire to become an adult. Bryony feels that the events she witnesses between Cecilia and Robbie have matured her sufficiently, so that by the time of Lola's assault, she believes she has fully entered adulthood. However, Bryony's assumptions and ignorance of certain topics show just how immature she still really is. Her eagerness to go from child to adult overnight demonstrates why growing up is a process instead of a switch that can be turned on and off. Even by the time Bryony is 18, though she has realized that what she did was wrong, she still justifies her actions and is unable to visit Cecilia or confront Lola or Paul Marshall. And at the age of 77, Bryony celebrates her birthday in her childhood home and still feels some of the same resentment toward Lola that she did at the age of 13. Bryony's progress shows that while growing up should not be rushed, some childish elements of ourselves never fully go away. Atonement is a postmodernist interpretation of historical fiction. How historical fiction is a kind of double fiction, a fiction within a fiction. Not that McEwan's intellectual mischief detracts from his gift for storytelling. For this is a compelling and moving story, and it's not until the end that we are called upon to question the roots of storytelling. How all the stories we tell require a measure of illusion to sustain them.